We are back on Inside Politics today. Our guests are State Senator Brenda Gilmore from here in Nashville and also David Ewing, a Nashville historian. We're talking about the city this weekend dedicating a large part of Fifth Avenue downtown in honor of civil rights icon John Lewis. Senator, let's talk a little bit about the event at the Ryman, because, Senator, there's quite a lineup of people that are going to be speaking there that night, and that's also going to be, or that afternoon, I should say, Saturday afternoon. Is that also a situation where it's going to be live streamed so people can't come down, they can at least see it online?
It will be live streamed, and I really want to take a point of personal privilege and give a shout out to Council Lady at Large Zorfet Sara and the Minority Caucus and the entire Metro Council for voting to name Representative John Lewis Way. And
it took a while, David, because COVID got in the middle of this, but there is some significance to why this is being dedicated on the day it's being dedicated on this coming Saturday.
It's the anniversary of when we lost John Lewis, and we're honoring him as Brenda said. We're honoring him at First Baptist Church, my church, and then the Ryman Auditorium, where he was honored by Dr. King.
David, you mentioned the significance of the Ryman being down there, and also just in terms of a facility downtown. It dates back to the 1800s when Tom Ryman built it. It had for its day, quite a liberal ability for African Americans to be there. It was not a strictly segregated kind of. It was from different events, but not in all events.
Anyone could rent the Ryman. So we had Meharry graduations, Pearl High School graduations. We had specific events like Booker T. Washington spoke at the Ryman 3 times, and so the Fifth Jubilee Singers sung many times. It was open. I did get a chance in 2016 to briefly interview John Lewis, and I think I'm probably the only person to ever talk to him about his experience at the Ryman, and he remembered the date he was there and remembered everything about it. It was significant to him to be honored at that building.
Senator, every time a street gets renamed, some people are happy about it, some people are not happy about it because they have a business there or something else. You've had some pushback about this from the legislature, is that right?
A little pushback. But overall, I think it's a positive thing for Nashville. And I think when students and visitors come to Nashville, they're excited to see that Representative John Lewis runs starting at Jefferson Street across the downtown area.
David, to use John Lewis's own words, what happened to him in Nashville had a profound impact on the rest of his life, and he talked about that.
Yeah, he talked about it in John Meacham's new book, that basically he wouldn't be who he was if it weren't for Nashville, Tennessee, Kelly Miller Smith, Fisk University, and American Baptist College. It was interesting, Barack Obama basically said in a documentary of David Letterman, if there were no John Lewis, there'd be no Barack Obama. But John Lewis basically said if there was no Nashville and Fisk and American Baptist, there would be no John Lewis.
Another thing we have not talked about in John Lewis's career was his involvement as a freedom rider. Now he put his life in danger to some degree when he was doing the sit-ins in Nashville, but Senator, not nearly what happened to him when he was doing the Freedom Riders, because those were through the Deep South, traveling on interstate buses, and they already had some pretty dangerous situations, including what happened with John Siegenthaler when he was working in the Justice Department. I mean, he almost got killed, and John Lewis put his life in danger many times.
He did, and we really have to admire him, because those young people knew what they were walking into and knew that they were going to be attacked by dogs, the water hose, and law enforcement, and he sacrificed himself for that and ended up with a concussion and almost died as a result of it.
Pat, I thought was interesting, in 1998, John Lewis writes his book, Walking with the Wind, his memoir, and he talks about Nashville, but he talks about getting arrested at Woolworth's for the very first time, that he was pushed to the ground, but he said he wasn't hit that hard. It's like you were pushed to the ground. I guess relative to getting beaten almost to death on Bloody Sunday and what happened to him at the Freedom Riders, what happened at Woolworth was nothing compared to those other things.
Senator, John Lewis was the youngest speaker also in 1963 at the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King made his I Have a Dream speech. As we see the new generation of those who are leading the movement, particularly after what happened last summer with all the unrest across the country, are we seeing that new generation of leadership coming forward? And how do you feel about that? Do they remember John Lewis, and how important is it for them to remember John Lewis?
I think to some extent, but I'm so proud, especially of our young people last year who led a 10,000 person peaceful protest, and those were young women too, by the way. So I'm really proud of this new generation, and we've seen it in Nashville where the peaceful protests, in fact, those protesters stayed out there 64 days straight.
David, John Lewis, as we mentioned earlier, was a part of the Edmund Pettus Bridge March on Bloody Sunday. That was to gain voting rights in the South. A lot of those gains appear to be, by Supreme Court rulings and other things, going away. Is it time for what John Lewis used to call more good trouble on issues like that?
I think so. I mean, obviously, we have a democratically controlled Senate that can't get this bill out of the Senate. And so I think a lot of people are wondering why we marched so much and people got out to vote during a pandemic. And people want to, voting is one of our core principles of our country. And if you look at even the history of the state, we ratified the 19th Amendment, gave 27 million women the right to vote. We should want everyone to vote.
Senator, up on the Hill, one of the big issues that's somewhat related to this has been the continuing presence of the bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest right outside the state Senate and not far from where the House chambers are. The governor now says that's been approved by enough people, it's ready to be moved, but it's not moved. Are you worried this is getting the slow walk again?
I don't know if I'm worried. I would just say that I'm hurt and I'm disappointed because both of the Capitol Commission and the Tennessee Historical Commission have voted overwhelmingly that it should be moved to the museum. And the speakers have asked that it go to the Building Commission. So it just seems like that every time that we get to the finish line, that finish line is moved one time, and I've been disappointed by that.
State Senator Brenda Gilmore is our guest, along with Nashville historian David Ewing. We're talking about John Lewis Way being dedicated in Nashville along Fifth Avenue this weekend. Back to continue our conversation after you watch these messages.